Hi everyone, my name is Ted Grantham. I'm a cooperative extension specialist and assistant professor in the Department of Environmental Science, Policy and Management at UC Berkeley. And I was tasked with giving an overview of freshwater science at the University of California, so just a small task. I'll get to this word cloud in a minute. But today I want to focus on sort of three roles that the University of California plays in this domain of freshwater science, specifically on research, training, and extension. I'm going to focus less on teaching today. But first of all, as a cooperative extension specialist, I want to kind of poll the room and get a sense of who has heard of UC Cooperative Extension. Okay, great. That's very encouraging. I'm going to talk a little bit about extension first and then move on to some of these other topics. And I just want to note that we actually wouldn't be standing here today if not for Abraham Lincoln, oddly enough, who created the land-grant university system. So in 1862, Congress passed the Morrill Act, which really recognized that, during sort of the period of westward expansion, the university had a really important role to play in training so the people of this country, and so the practical skills related to agriculture and engineering and natural resource management. And in California, our land grant institution, University of California, was established, of course, at this location. Looks pretty much like this now. Here at Berkeley, just a little different. Soon after the university system expanded and created Davis and the other campuses. And currently, that original land grant mission still exists and is largely concentrated on the three UC campuses of Berkeley, Davis, and Riverside. And this land grant mission is also associated with UC Cooperative Extension and this division of University of California called Ag and Natural Resources, which kind of manages and oversees the Cooperative Extension program. And this is often little known to most of the public unless they have experience working directly with Cooperative Extension advisors. But we're a network that has sort of a foot on the ground in all of the state's counties, focusing on really applied management problems. And I think that freshwater science does and should probably play a greater role in UC Cooperative Extension. So what does this sort of Cooperative Extension or A&R network look like? We have a presence in every county in the state. So we have local, what they're called extension advisors that are working in each of the state's counties, focusing on the local resource issues that are important to that region. We have research stations centered around 9 campuses or 9 locations throughout the state, in addition to statewide programs. And then specialists like myself are housed at these 3 UC campuses. So I just wanted to note that that's a sort of an overlooked aspect of the University of Cal system that plays an important role in, I think, applied research generally. Of course, we have our 9 UC campuses and a reserve system that's also plays a really important role in research, particularly Sage Hen, Snarl, and Angelo, where a lot of our UC freshwater research has been conducted over the past decades. So, kind of moving on to research, it would have been sort of easy to talk about the impact that a handful of UC researchers have had on freshwater science in the state. The Mary Powers, the Peter Moyles, Matt Condals, Vince Resch, Jay Lund. But I wanted to provide sort of a broader, maybe perhaps less biased perspective and capture the contributions of new faculty that are really making a big impact across our UC campuses that are perhaps less well known. But of course, I don't know, just like Allison, it's really hard to actually track and identify who's working in this space, given that our expertise is really spread out across multiple departments. This is true at Berkeley, this is true at Davis, this is true at all the campuses. But I attempted to kind of cycle through the faculty of all the UC campuses and compile a list of freshwater scientists at the University of California, which I'm sure is incomplete. I then used a bibliometric sort of analysis tool packaged in R to look at some of the themes in the publications and reports that have been produced by freshwater science faculty, and then started to look a little bit at collaboration networks across the UC system. So played around with the data a little bit. I just want to present some of the findings and some of the insights that I drew from this, at least preliminary analysis. So I'm not going to sort of list the individual faculty, but I was through this sort of quick and dirty analysis. This is the general distribution of freshwater science faculty across the UC system in terms of the numbers. And because I ran out of time, unfortunately, I'm just going to focus on the research contributions at these top 3 universities. And these are the ones that I'm most familiar with because I worked here at Davis for a little while, and I know a lot of the folks at Merced as well. So first, by the numbers, I looked at about 1,000, downloaded about 1,000 publications from Schoolbits, which is like Google Scholar, of these freshwater scientists that I identified across the UC system. Does anybody know what the mascot of UC Merced is? It's not the fairy shrimp, it should be. It's not, it's the bobcats. It'd be really cool if they were the fairy shrimp though. So these are kind of just by the numbers, and this basically again reflects the higher numbers of faculty in freshwater science at Berkeley and Davis. One encouraging sign is that we see this positive trend in publications in freshwater science. And I think this largely reflects new hires across the UC system, or at least at these 3 campuses, contributing to publications in this area. And we could break this down by campus. This word cloud basically represents the top 50 words in all those abstracts present in those 50 publications. And so it's encouraging to see that water is the most common word, so something's going right. Some things are a little bit strange though. I think our scientists apparently like to do three-year studies or have 3 hypotheses that they test. It probably reflects funding cycles actually. We only ever get funding to do 3 years of work and then the money runs out. But I think this reflects really the breadth of work that we're doing across the 3 systems, focusing on both the ecological and physical dimensions of riverine and wetland and lake ecosystems. And I won't have time to kind of play with this anymore comparing across campuses, but that was an interesting way to think about the work that we do collectively. Now, this is a collaboration network that represents the co-authorship relationships of these researchers that I identified at these three UC campuses, and I'll try to make some sense of this. So you see one really clear hub here, and that's the Center for Watershed Sciences at UC Davis, with Peter Moyle right at the heart of it, and this network of primarily UC Davis researchers, but there are also several researchers from other institutions that engage with them. Here's another UC Davis cluster, the Land, Air, and Water Resources Department, more of the physical scientists, the hydrologists, and then there's a handful of scattering of other sort of more isolated researchers at UC Davis that are less tied in some cases because they're newer researchers. Both these 3 on the left or your right are all new researchers, and some because their research areas are just pretty distinct from the others. If we look at Berkeley, we see a big cluster there, and this is a really interesting cluster. There's a lot of collaboration among these groups, which is interesting because they have really different fields. This includes geomorphologists and ecologists and more physical scientists. But there are also some very sort of disconnected areas of expertise as well at UC Berkeley, some kind of isolated pockets, and UC Merced sort of scattered around with some overlap. So my take home from this, there's a few different ways of looking at these data, is that there are sort of clusters of connectivity among researchers, but there are a lot of researchers that are not as well connected into this network of sort of collaborative work. So moving on to the role of training, this is a sort of a difficult thing to generalize. So I just wanted to highlight, sort of as a case study, one individual. Many of you are familiar with Dr. Vince Resch, now faculty emeritus at Berkeley, and it was just interesting to think about the important role that some of these individuals can play in training scientists who go on to these sort of applied, both academic and non-academic paths in California. So many of you are in this room, either working with government-affiliated organizations, NGOs, and many that are still working primarily in applied research at universities. So I just want to highlight that these individual faculty can have an enormous impact on training the individuals, the scientists that end up serving in the government agencies that are responsible for managing freshwater resources. So I'm just going to a few concluding comments around this sort of really preliminary or general overview of analysis. So first, we do have freshwater expertise across the UC system, but generally it's concentrated at Berkeley and Davis. Encouragingly, there is this positive trend in freshwater research, but maybe perhaps less encouraging is that there is not a very high degree of connectivity or collaboration across both within and across campuses. Although these important research hubs exist, and thinking about the role of these research hubs and promoting collaboration is really important. SWRCB and Sciences at Davis, for example, has played a really important role over the years, but whether that's going to be sustained in the future is maybe perhaps unclear as some of the key leaders retire and move on. I want to talk about this point about how the impact of individual faculty and researchers on training scientists who end up working at agencies and NGOs in freshwater science throughout the state. I think for many of the key kind of players and researchers at the UC system that have had this role, it's really been sort of about lucky, I think, and the fact that these researchers had this interest in sort of applied problem solving around freshwater science management. And I think we could be a little more sort of intentional in filling the gaps that are present here and making sure that UC can continue to serve this role. We can talk maybe more about this during the panel discussion. And then finally, I think many of the UC scientists that I looked at today in the freshwater field are involved in what I call applied research. So really research that's really relevant to the management challenges that we're facing across the state. But generally speaking, what I consider sort of extension, the role in sort of taking the science and bringing it to bear on the problems that we're dealing with are not really institutionalized, and they're a bit haphazard. And so, I as an extension specialist am one of the few in the extension network that's focusing on freshwater systems, and I'd really like to see that capacity enhanced, looking into the future. And I think these types of workshops and conferences can play an important role in thinking about how we might do that. So I will stop there, and thank you for your attention.
Hello? Okay, thanks, Ted. At this point,